Hello, and welcome to another edition of Recovery on Screen, the YouTube series produced by Recovery Movie Meetups, which takes a look at how films can teach us things about the nature of addiction and specifically how to overcome it and how movies can play a really crucial role in that process. Today, we have a very, very special guest to talk about one of my favorite films about addiction and recovery, Thanks for Sharing, directed by Stuart Blumberg. Stuart is actually with us here today, so you're not going to want to miss that. That's coming up right now. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a great pleasure to have somebody of your ilk and your position in Hollywood, having made what we consider in our community one of the finest films about addiction and recovery ever made, and one which is proudly featured in our program, and I think is benefiting a lot of individuals in recovery as we speak in meetings across the country and in Canada and across the world, using your film as a basis for rich discussions. Welcome to the show, Stuart. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ted. I'm really appreciative of what you do and this project of trying to get at recovery through film, because I agree with you. I think film is an incredibly powerful medium to bypass the intellect and go right into the emotion, which is where I think a lot of the change happens.
Oh, well said. That's absolutely true. And that's the point that we try to make in our program, in that, visuals, emotional connection really happens when you see the external reality of what you're experiencing as a subjective reality of addiction. When you see it on screen as an objective reality, it really hits home. Tell us, Stuart, how did you get the idea to do this? What was the process like to get it up and running? The casting. Tell us, give us some inside baseball on how it all came together.
So just gonna have to sort of break anonymity here, which I have had to do for this. I am a member of this fellowship for sexual addiction, and it's called Sexual Recovery Anonymous. When I joined the fellowship back in 1999, I immediately was like, oh, this is a movie, because my screenwriter brain was working. And luckily, my higher power was saying, maybe you should hold off for a second, and not just act like the expert, which is what I want to do. And it's one of my character defects. So I kind of worked the program hard, then not hard for years, until I had kind of a bottom just as I was having one of my biggest career successes, which was really interesting. And I kind of got the program for real for the first time just as that was happening. And I co-wrote this movie called The Kids Are All Right, got nominated for an Oscar, had some juice. And I was like, if there's ever time for me to make a movie about this subject, it's now. So I kind of struck while the iron was hot, wrote it with a friend of mine because I sort of didn't trust myself to write it by myself. And he's a great friend and co-writer, Matt Winston. And I had just worked with Mark Ruffalo on The Kids Are All Right. So one time we were sort of doing like an award show thing. He's like, hey man, what's next for you? And I said, well, I have this thing that I'm working on that's really important to me. He's like, show it to me. I showed it to him and he's like, I'm in. And that was sort of the linchpin. And I really am thankful for him for that. And I built the cast around him and we got this amazing cast. And it was one of those things where, and I have a lot of stories in my business of writing great scripts that have never been made, that have gotten completely rewritten. My higher power was looking down on me with this one because it happened relatively quickly. I got a great financier, Olympus Pictures, who really believed in it. And within a year of writing it, we were shooting. And it was a really powerful experience because a lot of it is my story and a lot of it is an amalgamation of just things I've seen and witnessed. And, I wanted to tell this story because I felt like there had been so many movies about addiction, about the bottom of addiction, like Shame, like Leaving Las Vegas. And these are all great movies. But I felt like there was a dearth of movies about well, okay, so what happens if you don't want to just commit suicide? You want to actually try to, have an amazing, joyous, and free life. And I felt like a lot of those movies were like rehab movies, and I felt like there wasn't a really good movie that detailed the actual process of the community the fellowship, working the steps, higher power, all of this stuff to try to get people, to trudge the road of, happy destiny. And so that's the story I wanted to tell. And that's what I tried to do with Thanks for Sharing, by showing three people in different stages of recovery, working sometimes at cross purposes, but hopefully often together to try to just figure this shit out, So that's the brief story of it.
Well, listen, I think it's a terrific film, and I think you achieved so much in it. And yet, it's ironic because from a marketing perspective, I remember when the film was released and how it was marketed. And I worked in film marketing at Universal Studios for many years. And so I learned early on that you don't market the movie you have. You market the movie you wish you had, or people are going to buy. Which is a little bit sort of like, disingenuous in certain respects. But from a business perspective, like, whatever you can get to have it be appealing to people. And so I felt at the time that like, oh, it's a movie specifically about sex addiction. That's what people are going to focus on. And yet when I saw the movie, I realized that that was just one part of it, but the movie's about so much more. When it was marketed and released, did you have also the impression like, wait a minute, that's not really the movie the way I want to sell it? I mean, what was
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not my first rodeo, and I've had a few experiences. A lot of my movies are sort of like that. They're false flag operations. And Even Kids Are All Right, which actually was the one that was most successful and marketed well. I try to sneak things into my movies. And like, there's this old expression, leave the messages to Western Union. Like, try not to be overly preachy. Like,
Right.
Try to have it be entertaining, fun, heartwarming, but also you can just sort of like, well, people don't even know it, get certain things in there. That sounded really like insidious propaganda, but I didn't mean it to sound like that. Anyway,
I see the same thing as in my book. I say that it's sort of like it's the fortune cookie effect. It's like the little nugget in the middle. If you find it, great, but you're not pounding people over the head to find the message. Have them find it themselves. It's like, cream on the top. But anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
no, but just like, to be honest, I've had a few experiences where I was like, oh, okay, I know why you're doing what you're doing. It bums me out because there's always a feeling like you're not trusting the audience really, which sometimes I understand why, and sometimes I wish they would trust the audience a little more. But I just made this movie not thinking it would do well, to be honest. I just wanted to get it out there. I really just wanted to tell this story. And I feel like this is one of those ones that, honestly didn't light up the movie screens when it came up, but I feel like it's had a real second and third life, in the way you're describing.
Yeah. Well, it has another incarnation as part of, the people across the country who are buying the movie all over again, watching it, enjoying it, and using it, therapeutically, as a way to help their own recovery. I think the movie really informs so many aspects of recovery, from, the story of Tim Robbins and, the relationship with his son and the relationship with his wife. And then there's like how you were able to weave so many elements into one cohesive 100-minute movie is, and as a screenwriter, I know how hard that is. I mean, that's just a lot of, compacting and making it work. And yet it does. So what was the most challenging storyline that hit most close to home? I mean, was it difficult to write one particular one, or did they all come naturally because you were so familiar with the stories?
It's interesting. Feel like the Josh Gad, the Neil storyline, and weirdly had parts of me in it, but like it wasn't there. The parts weren't. Some parts, it wasn't closest to the bone, so I could kind of write it. And I really liked his arc. I thought it was sort of the most fun arc. And Tim Robbins, in a way, was also not necessarily at the time my experience, but like I really knew what I wanted to say with that, and I knew people liked that. And so because it wasn't so close to home, I felt freer. Adam, the Mark Ruffalo story, was the closest to me. And that was the most challenging and the most painful. And there were scenes in there that were just painful to write, painful to shoot, and painful to edit, just personally.
Yeah, I get it. Wow. Well, I was talking with somebody the other day, and it's also one of our facility partners David Levin at Legacy Partners and Legacy Healing Operation. And he mentioned, and we were talking about the one scene where Tim Robbins finds out that everything is run amok, and he goes to the liquor store and he's about to buy a fifth of whiskey. And it's that moment that all of us in sort of like the alcohol recovery world, not necessarily you because you're different, but in alcohol, how many times we've been to that moment where like we've worked so hard, like, Tim Robbins, sponsor, he's like leading the community, he's the dude, like, he's the rock, like he's unmovable. And yet there he is once again, like all of us have found themselves in a stressful situation where the easy remedy is just to purchase, which is cheaper than water, and like it's so easy because there's stores everywhere. And we all sort of realize that that's just such an important scene that everybody's been through. Was that something that, how did you come up with that scene to show that moment? I mean, it's kind of like an obvious choice in many respects, but
I wanted to show a guy who seemingly has his recovery all together and to show the humbling aspect of addiction, which is it's one day at a time and it's a daily spiritual maintenance. And, that this guy who you're watching who seems to have all the answers is, the same thing can happen to him, and it can happen to him in a way where he's like, how did that even happen? And it's like, how did I get here? And there are the million little things that can lead you there that, afterwards you can go and trace it back. But it's just to show the humbling sort of nature of that disease, and then you could say I took the easy way out because he kind of got saved with the God shot by a phone call of a really scary thing with his son. But like, I've had God shots that have saved me from some particularly scary things as well. So,
wow,
it's funny. I watched a long time ago Requiem for a Dream, and I remember just like, so there were a lot of things where I was like, oh, that's where you would drink, that's where you would do drugs. I could just pinpoint like that's where you pick up, and like for this one it's sort of like, and this is when he would pick up.
Right. Requiem for a Dream is actually also featured in our workbook. So you're included in the pantheon of the top 20 movies ever made about addiction recovery. So thank you for being in that group of list of films. And what's coming next? If you tell our audience, what should we be looking for, Stuart? What's coming?
I'm doing a podcast, speaking of that, called Anything I've Seen, which is a podcast for screenwriters. Okay. But it's funny because it's about how screenwriters dread that question, like what should we be looking for next, or anything I've seen. Oh, but it's a thing I'm doing with another screenwriter, a friend of mine, about like the heartbreaks of like the projects that almost get there that don't. I wrote a project with Lisa Cholodenko, who I did The Kids Right with, which is a Carole King biopic, which was about to happen then isn't, but we're trying to like resurrect. And there's a thriller that I'm hopefully doing for Netflix next year called Wolves and Villagers. And then I'm writing sort of my own fun movie to hopefully direct next year, but I'm in the process of writing it now. So that's what I got.
Excellent. Well, listen, you have a lot of fans out there, and your movie is helping a lot of people out there. So, Stuart, on behalf of the entire Recovery Movie Meetups community and our show Recovery on Screen, thank you so much for joining us and talking about. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.